Case number 1, Danny Masterson. Danny Masterson became widely recognized for portraying Stephen Hyde on That 70s Show, making him one of television's familiar faces throughout the late 1990s and early 2000s. For years, his acting career appeared successful, but long after his rise to fame, allegations dating back decades would dramatically alter his public image. During 2017, as more survivors began sharing their experiences amid the growing #MeToo movement, several women accused Masterson of sexually assaulting them at his Hollywood Hills residence between 2001 and 2003. According to the allegations, the women believed they had been drugged before the assaults occurred. One question quickly became central to the investigation. Why had these accusations remained hidden for so many years? Masterson was a longtime member of the Church of Scientology, and several accusers claimed they felt discouraged from reporting what happened to law enforcement because of pressure within the organization. They said they feared retaliation, isolation, and being cut off from their community if they spoke publicly. The Church of Scientology has denied allegations that it discouraged members from reporting crimes to police. After reopening the matter in 2017, the Los Angeles Police Department launched a formal investigation. 3 years later, in June 2020, Masterson was arrested and charged with 3 counts of forcible rape. The legal battle that followed proved far from straightforward. His first criminal trial began in 2022, but jurors could not unanimously agree on a verdict. Because the jury remained deadlocked, the judge declared a mistrial. Prosecutors then faced an important decision. Rather than abandon the case, they chose to present it before a second jury. That retrial took place in 2023. This time, jurors found Masterson guilty on 2 of the 3 rape charges. They remained unable to reach a unanimous decision on the 3rd allegation, and that count was later dismissed instead of resulting in an acquittal. Throughout the proceedings, several women described the emotional impact the alleged assaults had on nearly every aspect of their lives. Their testimony highlighted the difficulties many survivors face when reporting crimes years after they occurred. One victim addressed Masterson directly during sentencing, saying, "I forgive you. Your sickness is no longer mine to carry." Other victims explained how the events affected their relationships, careers, and mental well-being for years afterward. Masterson consistently denied the allegations. His defense maintained that every encounter had been consensual, and argued the prosecution relied largely on testimony about events that happened decades earlier without physical evidence. On September 7, 2023, the court sentenced Danny Masterson to 30 years to life in prison. The punishment consisted of 2 consecutive prison terms of 15 years to life. Because those sentences run one after another instead of simultaneously, California law requires him to serve at least 30 years before becoming eligible to seek parole. Even then, release is not automatic. Any future parole board will consider the seriousness of the offenses, his conduct while incarcerated, and other legal factors before making a decision. If parole were ever granted, Masterson would already be in his late 70s. Following his conviction, That 70s Show disappeared from some streaming platforms, while reactions from former cast members varied. Some publicly supported the victims. Others chose not to comment. Then another setback arrived. In April 2024, a California appellate court denied Masterson's request to remain free on bail while challenging his conviction. The court concluded he presented a significant flight risk because of the lengthy sentence he faces. Meanwhile, his attorneys continue arguing that legal errors occurred during trial and that certain evidence should not have been admitted before the jury. The appeals process is expected to continue for years. While this case centered on allegations of sexual assault, the next story would reveal how a family dispute ended in an entirely different tragedy. And before we continue, if you enjoy carefully researched true crime documentaries, consider supporting Daily Crime Archive by subscribing. New cases are released regularly, and you won't want to miss what's coming next. Case number 2, Michael Jace. Michael Jace built his reputation portraying Officer Julian Lowe on the acclaimed FX drama The Shield. Ironically, the actor known for playing a police officer would later become the subject of one of Hollywood's most heartbreaking criminal cases. On the evening of May 19, 2014, Jace's wife, April, returned to their Los Angeles home with the couple's 2 young sons. What should have been another ordinary night instead became a devastating crime scene witnessed by their children. Prosecutors said Jace shot April multiple times, striking her in the legs before firing the shot that ultimately took her life. Investigators believed the manner of the attack suggested far more than a sudden emotional outburst. The obvious question became, what pushed him to commit such an act? Evidence introduced during trial suggested Jace had become increasingly jealous and suspected his wife of having an affair. Prosecutors also presented evidence that April had expressed her desire to end the marriage through divorce. Financial difficulties had placed additional strain on their relationship, adding even more tension inside the household. After the shooting, Jace himself dialed 911. Rather than attempting to flee, he remained at the home until officers arrived and surrendered without resistance. As investigators examined the couple's relationship, witnesses described ongoing arguments and growing conflict between them. Family members and close friends portrayed April as a caring mother determined to provide stability for her children, despite the marriage continuing to deteriorate. Perhaps the most emotional testimony came from the couple's young sons. One child remembered telling his mother, "If you like running, then run to heaven." The heartbreaking words reflected both her love of running and the unimaginable loss the family had suffered. After reviewing all of the evidence, jurors convicted Michael Jace of second-degree murder. Although prosecutors did not establish the level of premeditation required for first-degree murder, evidence showed he mocked April's passion for running before shooting her in the legs and then in the back. That distinction affected the legal charge, but not the devastating outcome. During sentencing, Jace admitted there was no excuse for what he had done. While he accepted responsibility, his remarks brought little comfort to April's loved ones, or the children left without their mother. On June 10, 2016, the court sentenced him to 40 years to life in prison. The sentence combined 15 years to life for the murder conviction, with an additional 25 years because a firearm was used during the crime. April's family remembered her as a devoted mother, an accomplished professional working in financial services. They explained that she had carried much of the family's financial responsibilities, while Jace's acting opportunities had declined. Her death left a permanent void in the lives of her children. Michael Jace continues serving his sentence inside the California prison system. Exactly when he may become eligible for parole remains uncertain, but any opportunity for release is still decades away. His acting career ended completely. The Shield became the final major production associated with his name. About halfway through today's documentary, we'd like to thank everyone supporting Daily Crime Archive. Your subscriptions and comments help us continue producing carefully researched true crime documentaries based on real cases. But the next story may be the most disturbing yet. It involves a promising young actor whose untreated mental health crisis ended in an unimaginable tragedy. Case number 3, Johnny Lewis. Johnny Lewis built a promising television career with appearances in several popular series, including Sons of Anarchy, where audiences knew him as Kip Halfsack Epps. To many fans, he seemed destined for a long career in Hollywood. Instead, his life would end in one of the entertainment industry's most tragic and bewildering cases. On September 26, 2012, Lewis entered the Los Angeles home of his 81-year-old landlady, Catherine Davis. What investigators found inside left the entire neighborhood in disbelief. Davis had suffered fatal injuries during the encounter, and even her cat had been killed. Authorities quickly realized this wasn't an ordinary homicide. Evidence suggested Lewis was experiencing an extreme mental health crisis. Neighbors later described seeing him acting strangely throughout the day. Several reported bizarre behavior and confrontations before the fatal incident unfolded. His actions painted the picture of someone who was no longer thinking rationally. That raised another difficult question. What caused such a dramatic change? Investigators learned Lewis had reportedly suffered a significant head injury in previous years. According to evidence presented after his death, that injury was never properly treated. Medical experts have long warned that traumatic brain injuries can lead to severe personality changes, impaired judgment, loss of impulse control, and, in some cases, psychotic episodes. Family members later said Lewis repeatedly refused treatment, despite his worsening condition. Helping him became increasingly difficult. One finding surprised many people following the case. The Los Angeles County coroner reported that Lewis had no alcohol or illegal drugs in his system at the time of his death. However, investigators also documented his previous use of synthetic substances, including spice and 2CI. His father believed those drugs may have caused permanent neurological damage. For many observers, the toxicology results challenged the early assumption that drugs alone explained his behavior that day. Moments after the attack on Catherine Davis, Lewis either jumped or fell from the roof of the property. He died from the injuries sustained in the fall before authorities could question him. Because of his death, there would never be a criminal trial. As detectives continued piecing together the timeline, they discovered Lewis had been arrested several times on relatively minor offenses during the months leading up to the tragedy. Each release was reportedly followed by renewed attempts from family and friends to convince him to seek psychiatric treatment. But California's legal standards made involuntary commitment extremely difficult unless someone presented an immediate danger. Lewis had also been raised in Scientology. Some reports suggested his family's religious beliefs, including opposition to psychiatric treatment, led them toward detox-based programs instead of clinical mental health care after his head injury. That has been cited as one possible influence on the treatment decisions made during his decline. His former Sons of Anarchy castmates later expressed shock over what had happened. Several admitted they had noticed changes in his behavior, but never imagined the crisis had become so severe. The tragedy sparked broader conversations throughout the entertainment industry about recognizing warning signs and improving mental health support for performers. Later, Los Angeles Magazine published an extensive investigation titled The Secret Life of Johnny Lewis, examining his downward spiral and exploring opportunities where intervention may have prevented the tragedy. Meanwhile, Catherine Davis's family remembered her as a compassionate woman who had simply tried to provide Lewis with affordable housing. They never imagined their kindness would end so tragically. Because Lewis died at the scene, there was no conviction, no sentencing, and no courtroom verdict. Instead, the case became a painful reminder of how untreated mental illness can spiral into irreversible tragedy, and how difficult intervention can be before someone reaches a legal threshold for mandatory treatment. The questions surrounding his final months continue to be discussed today. While this case centered on mental health, the next story reveals how severe depression led another young actor down an equally devastating path. Case number 4, Ryan Grantham. Ryan Grantham appeared in productions, including Riverdale and Diary of a Wimpy Kid. With a successful acting career already underway, many believed his future in film and television looked bright. Everything changed in March 2020. On March 31st, inside the family's British Columbia home, Grantham shot his mother, Barbara Waite, while she was playing the piano. Investigators concluded she was struck from behind. The circumstances suggested planning rather than a sudden emotional outburst. But what happened next stunned investigators even more. Shortly after the shooting, Grantham recorded himself using a GoPro camera. During the recording, he admitted what he had done. The video became some of the strongest evidence in the entire case. Authorities later asked the obvious question: why would someone kill the person who had supported them for years? Psychiatric evaluations revealed Grantham had been battling severe depression and anxiety over a prolonged period. Investigators also learned he had developed disturbing thoughts about committing additional acts of violence. According to statements made during the investigation, he believed killing his mother would spare her from witnessing the crimes he believed he might later commit. Those plans reportedly included possible attacks involving political figures. Fortunately, those plans were never carried out. After remaining inside the home for several hours, Grantham packed his vehicle the following day. Police later discovered firearms, ammunition, and Molotov cocktails inside. Evidence suggested he had initially intended to travel toward Ottawa. Instead, he changed course. Rather than carrying out additional violence, Grantham drove to Vancouver police and surrendered. He confessed to killing his mother before any further tragedy occurred. Investigators later concluded that decision likely prevented additional loss of life. Court proceedings focused heavily on psychiatric testimony. Experts described years of worsening depression that became even more severe during COVID-19 isolation. The defense presented evidence showing his mental health had significantly deteriorated before the shooting. Grantham ultimately pleaded guilty to second-degree murder. His guilty plea spared his family the emotional burden of a lengthy criminal trial. During sentencing, he expressed remorse and acknowledged that his mother had spent years trying to help him. Barbara Waite's sister described her as a loving parent who had supported Ryan's acting ambitions from childhood. She said the family never realized how serious his mental health struggles had become. They later encouraged greater awareness of mental illness and earlier intervention for people experiencing similar crises. In September 2022, Grantham received a life sentence. Canadian law requires a 14-year period of parole ineligibility for his conviction, meaning he cannot apply for parole until March 2034. Even then, release is far from guaranteed. Any future parole hearing will examine his rehabilitation, psychological progress, treatment history, and whether he still presents a risk to society. Initially, Grantham was housed in a maximum security psychiatric unit because of his high-profile case and mental health needs. By late 2024, he had reportedly been transferred to a medium-security federal institution, where he continues long-term rehabilitation. Cases involving mental illness are often deeply complex, but the next story leaves far less room for misunderstanding. Around the middle of today's documentary, we'd also like to thank everyone supporting Daily Crime Archive. Every subscription, like, and comment helps us continue producing carefully researched, true crime documentaries based on verified court records and investigations. Coming up next, a reality television personality whose carefully crafted public image concealed allegations spanning decades, and whose conviction ensured he will never leave prison. Case number 5, Will Hayden. Will Hayden became well known as the star of Discovery Channel's Sons of Guns, where viewers saw him as the outspoken owner of Red Jacket Firearms in Louisiana. For years, television portrayed him as a respected firearms expert and businessman. Behind that public image, however, investigators would eventually uncover allegations stretching back decades. Everything changed in August 2014. Authorities announced allegations that Hayden had sexually abused multiple people within his own circle, including family members. According to investigators, some of the accusations dated as far back as the 1990s, revealing an alleged pattern that had remained hidden for years. The length of time involved shocked both viewers and people who knew him personally. Because these cases involved minors, many of the specific allegations remain protected by law and cannot be described publicly. What court records do show is that several victims came forward with claims involving serious abuse committed over an extended period. Many of those accusing Hayden had trusted him. That trust, prosecutors argued, became part of how the abuse continued for so long. The allegations quickly reached national headlines. Within days of Hayden's arrest, Discovery Channel canceled Sons of Guns and ended its relationship with both the series and Red Jacket Firearms. Episodes were removed from circulation as the network distanced itself from the controversy. As investigators interviewed additional witnesses, they uncovered allegations describing a long-running pattern that had rarely been reported to authorities. Victims later explained why speaking out had been so difficult. Some described Hayden as controlling. Others feared they would not be believed. Several also said they depended on him emotionally or financially, making it even harder to come forward. Investigators believe those power imbalances played a major role in keeping the alleged abuse hidden. Hayden was arrested in August 2014. Given the seriousness of the charges, prosecutors argued he posed both a danger to the community and a potential flight risk. The court denied bond, meaning he remained behind bars throughout the legal proceedings. Nearly 3 years later, in April 2017, the case finally reached its conclusion. After hearing testimony from numerous witnesses and victims, the jury found Hayden guilty on multiple charges involving sexual offenses against minors. Many of those who testified described carrying the emotional weight of the abuse for years before finally entering the courtroom. Later that year, Hayden received one of the harshest sentences available under Louisiana law. The judge imposed 2 consecutive life sentences, plus an additional 40 years in prison. Because Louisiana law requires life sentences for these offenses to be served without the possibility of parole, Hayden will never become eligible for release. Running the sentences consecutively ensured he would spend the remainder of his life incarcerated. During sentencing, several victims addressed the court directly. They spoke about years of trauma, damaged relationships, and lasting struggles with trust. For many, the courtroom marked the first opportunity to confront the man they said had changed their lives forever. Hayden has consistently maintained his innocence. He continues challenging the convictions through the appeals process. So far, every appeal has been unsuccessful. Today, he remains imprisoned in Louisiana, where he is expected to spend the rest of his life. The case became a reminder that public fame can sometimes conceal deeply disturbing criminal conduct. Instead of being remembered for firearms or reality television, Sons of Guns is now largely associated with the criminal case that ended its run. But while Hayden's crimes allegedly relied on years of manipulation, the next case involves something far more immediate. A single argument, days of planning, and a calculated act of revenge. Case number 6, Isaiah Stokes. Isaiah Stokes appeared in several episodes of Law & Order, Special Victims Unit, frequently portraying criminals and gang members on screen. Years later, prosecutors would argue that real life tragically mirrored those fictional roles. The events began on February 7, 2021. Authorities say Stokes fatally shot Tyrone Jones in Queens, New York. Investigators traced the violence back to an argument that had taken place only days earlier at a party. According to witnesses, Stokes had been asked to leave after an altercation. Most people would have moved on. Police say he chose something very different. Rather than letting the dispute end there, investigators discovered Stokes had secretly attached a GPS tracking device to Jones's vehicle. That evidence suggested careful preparation instead of an impulsive decision. For several days, prosecutors argued, he monitored Jones's movements while waiting for the right opportunity. The shooting happened in broad daylight, inside a residential neighborhood. Witnesses watched as Stokes approached Jones's vehicle and opened fire. Jones desperately attempted to drive away. Moments later, his vehicle crashed. He died from multiple gunshot wounds. Investigators now faced another important question. How could a relatively minor disagreement escalate into murder? According to prosecutors, Stokes became consumed by what he viewed as a personal insult. Being asked to leave the party allegedly damaged his pride. Evidence presented during trial suggested he became determined to restore what he believed was his reputation. The response, prosecutors argued, was wildly disproportionate to the original confrontation. Police quickly gathered substantial evidence, witness testimony, surveillance footage, and perhaps most importantly, the GPS tracker itself. Together, investigators said those pieces demonstrated clear premeditation. Throughout the trial, prosecutors repeatedly emphasized one point. Installing the tracker gave Stokes numerous opportunities to reconsider. Instead, they argued, he continued planning until he finally carried out the shooting. Jones's family later addressed the court. They described losing a son, a father, and a valued member of their community over nothing more than a disagreement at a party. They reminded the court that asking someone to leave a gathering should never result in a family planning a funeral. Although prosecutors described the crime as carefully planned, New York law reserves first-degree murder for specific circumstances involving protected victims, such as police officers. Because those legal requirements were not met, second-degree murder represented the highest applicable charge. Following a lengthy trial in Queens Supreme Court, Isaiah Stokes was convicted. In late 2024, the court sentenced him to 25 years to life in prison. While announcing the sentence, the judge specifically referenced the GPS tracker, calling it powerful evidence that the killing had been deliberate and calculated. Under New York law, Stokes must serve at least 25 years before becoming eligible to seek parole. Whether parole is ever granted will depend on future decisions by the parole board. During sentencing, the judge also noted that countless people experience arguments and disrespect without resorting to violence. Tracking another person for days before shooting them, the court said, could never be justified. Since his conviction, Stokes' acting career has effectively ended. His appearances in Law & Order SVU have been removed from some streaming releases where possible, and he remains incarcerated in the New York prison system. His case stands as another reminder of how wounded pride and revenge can destroy multiple lives in an instant. If you've been enjoying these carefully researched breakdowns, consider subscribing to Daily Crime Archive. Your support allows us to continue producing detailed documentaries covering real criminal cases from verified court records. But the next stories take a completely different direction. Instead of violent crimes, we'll examine how fame, celebrity status, and enormous wealth became tied to some of the biggest fraud investigations involving reality television personalities. Case number 7. Todd and Julie Chrisley. Todd and Julie Chrisley became household names through the USA Network reality series Chrisley Knows Best, which premiered in 2014. Week after week, viewers watched a family surrounded by luxury, designer wardrobes, expensive cars, upscale homes, and a lifestyle that appeared almost flawless. But behind the cameras, federal investigators believed a very different story had been unfolding. In 2019, prosecutors charged the couple with bank fraud, wire fraud, and tax evasion, alleging they had obtained more than $30 million through fraudulent financial schemes. According to investigators, the conduct began years before they ever became television stars. Federal prosecutors claimed the couple submitted fabricated financial documents, including altered bank statements and false audit reports, to convince lenders they possessed far greater wealth than they actually did. Those documents allegedly helped them secure millions of dollars in loans. Investigators argued that borrowed money financed much of the extravagant lifestyle viewers saw on television. Luxury homes, high-end vehicles, designer clothing, and lavish vacations. Ironically, prosecutors said the very image that attracted audiences had been built on deception. One aspect of the investigation stood out. Even after the television show became successful and generated legitimate income, prosecutors alleged the fraudulent conduct continued. Authorities also accused the couple of hiding taxable income from the Internal Revenue Service. According to court filings, payments connected to Todd's television earnings were allegedly routed through corporate entities in an effort to conceal income. Federal agents spent years tracing financial transactions through numerous companies and bank accounts. Their investigation relied heavily on financial records. It also included testimony from former employees. Several witnesses told jurors they had been instructed to prepare false documents or manipulate records connected to loans. Another key witness proved especially damaging. The couple's former accountant testified extensively about their financial practices, giving jurors an inside view of how prosecutors believed the fraud operated over many years. When the case finally reached trial in 2022, prosecutors introduced thousands of financial documents. Jurors reviewed evidence involving forged paperwork, hidden assets, and complex financial transactions allegedly designed to mislead banks and tax authorities. The government argued the evidence demonstrated a long-running pattern rather than isolated mistakes. Throughout the proceedings, Todd and Julie Chrisley denied any wrongdoing. Their defense claimed they had been framed by a former employee who allegedly stole from them before attempting to shift blame. Jurors ultimately rejected that explanation. On June 7, 2022, both Todd and Julie were convicted on multiple fraud and tax-related charges. The verdict meant lengthy prison sentences were now almost certain. Todd initially received 12 years in federal prison. Julie was sentenced to 7 years. Both were also ordered to pay substantial financial restitution. The legal battle continued after sentencing. In June 2024, an appeals court upheld Todd's conviction and sentence. Julie's sentence, however, was temporarily vacated because the appellate court questioned whether enough evidence supported part of her involvement in bank fraud before 2007. Later that year, during a new sentencing hearing, the judge imposed 84 months once again, the same 7-year prison term she originally received. As of January 2026, both Todd and Julie Chrisley remain incarcerated in federal prison while continuing to maintain their innocence. Although public speculation surrounding a possible presidential pardon attracted widespread attention during the 2024-2025 political transition, no pardon had been granted at that time. The couple continues pursuing legal avenues while serving their respective sentences. Their case remains one of the highest-profile financial crime prosecutions involving reality television personalities. Chrisley Knows Best ended following the convictions, leaving a legacy defined less by entertainment and more by the fraud case that overshadowed the family's public image. While the Chrisleys allegedly deceived financial institutions, the next celebrity case involved a scheme that prosecutors said targeted ordinary people, many of them elderly. Case number 8, Jen Shah. Jen Shah rose to national fame as one of the central personalities on Bravo's The Real Housewives of Salt Lake City. The series introduced viewers to her extravagant lifestyle, expensive fashion, luxury parties, and larger-than-life personality. Behind that image, however, federal investigators had already been building a very different case. In March 2021, Shah was arrested and charged with conspiracy to commit wire fraud and money laundering. According to prosecutors, she played a leadership role in a nationwide telemarketing operation that operated for nearly a decade. Investigators alleged the organization focused heavily on vulnerable victims, especially elderly people. The operation reportedly relied on what prosecutors called lead lists. These databases identified individuals who had previously responded to marketing offers, making them more likely to purchase additional products. Members of the organization then sold expensive business services and coaching programs. According to prosecutors, many of those promises were misleading or entirely false. Victims were encouraged to believe they could earn substantial income through the programs. Instead, many lost enormous amounts of money. Investigators said the elderly suffered especially severe financial harm. Some reportedly exhausted retirement savings while believing they had invested in legitimate opportunities. The investigation also revealed a carefully layered organization. Rather than personally speaking with victims, prosecutors said Shah supervised employees who handled the direct sales. That structure insulated her from much of the day-to-day contact, while allowing the operation to continue generating revenue. When the charges became public, Shah strongly denied the allegations. Her legal battle quickly became one of the biggest storylines featured on the reality series. But shortly before trial, everything changed. On July 11, 2022, Shah unexpectedly pleaded guilty to one count of conspiracy to commit wire fraud. The timing surprised many observers. With trial approaching, the guilty plea suggested the government possessed overwhelming evidence. During her plea hearing, Shah admitted participating in the fraudulent operation. She also acknowledged knowing that many of the victims were elderly and vulnerable. In addition, she admitted the services being sold often had little or no real value, and that customers were intentionally misled. Victim impact statements later revealed the devastating consequences. Several people described losing life savings. Others explained they had been forced to delay retirement or return to work after believing false promises. One particularly emotional statement described an elderly victim persuaded to spend tens of thousands of dollars on programs that never delivered what had been promised. The financial losses were permanent. During sentencing, Shah apologized to the court. She accepted responsibility for her actions and expressed remorse for the suffering experienced by her victims. On January 6, 2023, the judge sentenced Jen Shah to 6.5 years in federal prison. She was also ordered to forfeit approximately $6.5 million and pay significant restitution. Even so, many victims are unlikely to recover the money they lost. Shah began serving her sentence at a federal prison in Texas. As of early 2026, she remains incarcerated. Although her sentence was reduced by approximately 1 year through federal calculations, prison records project her release around mid-2028, assuming she continues earning available credits under federal rules. Since entering prison, Shah has remained largely absent from the spotlight. Meanwhile, The Real Housewives of Salt Lake City has continued without her, occasionally referencing the criminal case that transformed the series. The story serves as another reminder that appearances can be deceiving. Behind a life filled with luxury, investigators uncovered a scheme that prosecutors said profited from some of society's most vulnerable people. If you're enjoying these deep dives into real criminal cases, don't forget to support Daily Crime Archive. Every subscription helps us continue producing carefully researched documentaries, covering the stories behind the headlines. But the next case raises the stakes even higher. It involves an actor accused of orchestrating one of Hollywood's largest Ponzi schemes, one that allegedly cost investors hundreds of millions of dollars. Case number 9, Zack Avery. Zachary Horwitz. Actor Zachary Horwitz, better known professionally as Zack Avery, appeared in a handful of independent films and television productions. While he never achieved major Hollywood success on screen, prosecutors say he created an entirely different kind of performance behind the scenes. Between 2015 and 2019, investigators allege Horwitz orchestrated one of the largest Ponzi schemes ever connected to the entertainment industry. Federal prosecutors estimated investors lost approximately $690 million. The victims ranged from private individuals to investment firms, many of whom believed they were backing legitimate Hollywood business opportunities. The pitch sounded convincing. Horwitz claimed he had secured exclusive international film distribution agreements with major companies such as Netflix and HBO. To support those claims, he created a company called 1INMM Capital and presented himself as a well-connected film executive with insider access to lucrative streaming deals. Investigators later determined those claims were false. According to prosecutors, Horwitz fabricated contracts complete with forged signatures, fake corporate branding, and counterfeit paperwork designed to convince investors that multi-million-dollar licensing agreements actually existed. Those documents became the foundation of the entire operation. Potential investors were promised annual returns between 35% and 40%. Although those numbers should have raised immediate concerns, prosecutors said Horwitz persuaded investors that international film rights generated unusually large profits. As with many Ponzi schemes, early investors received payments funded not by legitimate business revenue, but by money collected from newer investors. Those early payouts created trust and encouraged even more people to invest. Meanwhile, investigators said Horwitz used much of the money to support a lavish lifestyle that included luxury vehicles, expensive vacations, and a multi-million-dollar home in Beverlywood. His public image reinforced the illusion that his business empire was thriving. Eventually, the scheme began falling apart. Representatives from HBO and Netflix became aware their company names were being used without authorization. When they contacted investors to clarify that no such distribution agreements existed, panic spread almost immediately. The illusion collapsed. In April 2021, FBI agents arrested Horwitz at his California home. Their investigation uncovered forged contracts, fabricated emails, and extensive evidence of deliberate deception. Faced with overwhelming evidence, Horwitz pleaded guilty to securities fraud in October 2021. Victims later described devastating financial losses. Some had invested retirement savings. Others borrowed money, believing the opportunities were genuine. One investor explained that money intended for a child's education had disappeared forever. On February 14, 2022, Horwitz received a sentence of 20 years in federal prison. The court also ordered him to repay approximately $230 million, although recovering those funds remains highly unlikely for many victims. As of 2025, Horwitz continues serving his sentence inside the federal prison system. Even with good conduct credits, his projected release is not expected until 2037. Any acting career he once hoped to build has been permanently overshadowed by one of Hollywood's largest financial fraud cases. But while Horwitz admitted guilt, the next celebrity case ended very differently. A famous actor avoided criminal conviction, yet still faced devastating consequences in civil court. Case number 10. Robert Blake. Robert Blake spent decades building one of Hollywood's longest acting careers. From childhood performances in Our Gang shorts to his starring role in Beretta, he became one of television's most recognizable faces. Then, in 2001, everything changed. On the night of May 4th, Blake and his wife, Bonnie Lee Bakley, finished dinner at a Los Angeles restaurant. According to Blake, he returned inside the restaurant after realizing he had forgotten a handgun. When he came back outside, Bakley had been shot while sitting alone inside the car. Investigators immediately focused on Blake. Their relationship had reportedly been troubled from the beginning. Bakley became pregnant, and DNA testing later confirmed Blake was the father. Although the couple eventually married, witnesses later testified that Blake deeply resented the relationship. As detectives examined the case, prosecutors alleged Blake had previously approached several individuals seeking someone willing to kill Bakley in exchange for money. Two stuntmen later testified they had rejected those requests. Based on the evidence collected, Blake was arrested and charged with murder, as well as soliciting others to commit the crime. Throughout the case, he firmly denied any involvement. The trial began in 2005 and lasted several months. Jurors heard testimony from dozens of witnesses, while prosecutors argued Blake had both motive and opportunity. The defense challenged nearly every major witness presented against him. Attorneys questioned credibility, attacked inconsistencies, and suggested someone connected to Bakley's complicated past may have been responsible instead. On March 16, 2005, jurors found Blake not guilty. The prosecution, they concluded, had failed to prove guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. But the legal battle wasn't over. Bakley's family later filed a civil wrongful death lawsuit, where the burden of proof is significantly lower than in criminal court. That jury reached a different conclusion. In November 2005, Blake was found civilly liable for Bakley's death and ordered to pay $30 million to her children. Although acquitted criminally, the civil judgment permanently changed both his finances and his public reputation. Blake never returned to acting. He spent the remainder of his life largely away from public attention. He died from heart disease on March 9, 2023. Although he was never convicted of murder, he had spent roughly 1 year in county jail awaiting trial between 2002 and 2003. His death revived public debate over whether justice had truly been served. Today, discussions surrounding Robert Blake continue to divide public opinion. From a man acquitted in court, the next story involves someone who admitted guilt, but never lived long enough to receive his sentence. Case number 11, Mark Salling. Mark Salling became famous playing Noah Puck Puckerman on the hit television series Glee. For years, millions associated him with one of television's most successful musical dramas. Behind the scenes, however, investigators uncovered evidence that would permanently destroy his career. In late 2015, Salling's then-girlfriend contacted authorities after discovering disturbing files on his computer. Her report triggered an investigation by the Los Angeles Police Department's Internet Crimes Against Children Task Force. After obtaining a search warrant, investigators examined computers and storage devices recovered from Salling's home. Forensic specialists ultimately located more than 50,000 illegal images and videos involving minors. Federal prosecutors described both the quantity and seriousness of the material as extraordinarily severe. On October 4, 2017, Salling pleaded guilty to possessing child sexual abuse material. Under the plea agreement, he faced between 4 and 7 years in federal prison, lifetime registration as a sex offender, and 20 years of supervised release after imprisonment. His admission ended the criminal case. Sentencing was scheduled for March 7, 2018. He never appeared. On January 30, 2018, only weeks before sentencing, Salling died by suicide in a wooded area near Big Tujunga Creek in Los Angeles. He was 35 years old. His death generated sharply divided reactions. Victim advocates reminded the public that his death did not erase either the evidence or the harm associated with his admitted crimes. Many television networks later reduced or removed his appearances whenever possible. Instead of being remembered for Glee, Salling's legacy became permanently tied to the criminal case that ended both his career and his life. While Salling avoided prison because of his death, the final case features someone who remains incarcerated on California's death row. Case number 12, Skyler Deleon. Skyler Deleon had only a minor, uncredited connection to Mighty Morphin Power Rangers during childhood. Years later, prosecutors would link Deleon to one of California's most disturbing murder cases. In November 2004, retired couple Thomas and Jackie Hawks advertised their yacht for sale. Investigators say Deleon posed as a prospective buyer. What appeared to be a routine demonstration quickly became a carefully planned robbery. After the yacht reached open water, prosecutors said Deleon and 2 accomplices overpowered the couple. Thomas and Jackie Hawks were tied to the vessel's anchor before being thrown into the ocean alive. Their bodies were never recovered. Investigators believed the motive centered on financial gain. Authorities said Deleon forced Thomas Hawks to sign ownership documents and transfer financial assets before carrying out the murders. The goal, prosecutors argued, was to sell the yacht and profit from the theft. The Hawks family quickly realized something was wrong after losing contact with the couple. As detectives reviewed paperwork connected to the yacht, they noticed suspicious ownership transfers pointing directly toward Deleon. The investigation gained momentum when one accomplice eventually confessed. That statement provided investigators with critical details describing exactly what had happened aboard the yacht. As detectives dug deeper, they connected Deleon to another homicide. Evidence linked Deleon to the 2003 murder of John Jarvie, another man connected through financial dealings. Prosecutors argued the additional killing demonstrated an ongoing pattern of violence motivated by money. Following trial, jurors convicted Deleon of multiple counts of first-degree murder. On April 10, 2009, the court imposed the death penalty. Family members of Thomas and Jackie Hawks described the devastating loss of loved ones who had simply hoped to sell their retirement yacht. Instead, prosecutors said they encountered someone willing to kill for financial gain. In 2022, Deleon, who now identifies as a woman and goes by Skyler Deleon, officially transitioned while incarcerated. She was transferred from San Quentin to the Central California Women's Facility under California housing policies for transgender inmates. Today, she remains on death row. The case stands as one of California's most notorious examples of greed leading to calculated violence. Hollywood often creates unforgettable stories for the screen, but these cases remind us that reality can be far more disturbing than fiction. If you found today's documentary informative, consider subscribing to Daily Crime Archive and turning on notifications so you never miss future investigations into the world's most shocking criminal cases. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next case.